All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your coming. Welcome to Wednesday Forum. This is a weekly discussion that is held by both the Center for Religious and Cross-Cultural Studies, a master's program at the Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University, and the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies, a doctoral program that is a consortium of 3 universities in Yogyakarta, Gadjah Mada University, State Islamic University Sunan Kalijaga, and Duta Wacana Christian University. I'm Aziz Anwar from CRCS, and the speaker today is Dr. Iqbal Ahnaf, who is a lecturer at CRCS, and he has been teaching courses on religion, conflict, and peace building for many years. He was also my lecturer too, and he earned his PhD at Wellington University in New Zealand with a dissertation about Hizbut Tahrir. And he is going to talk about the rise of Islamist movement. Well, despite the rise of Islamist movements, actually there has been also a case of decline. So on one hand, we see Islamist movements like Islamic Defenders Front or other movements within its circle that are going prominent in national discourse. But on the other hand, we also see a decline in the case of the group that Pak Iqbal is going to talk about, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. So what are the factors that contribute to this decline? I think that is the main theme that Pak Iqbal is going to talk about. And before we proceed, for those of you who want to ask or comment, you can write down your questions in the chat box, or for those of you who are watching this forum via YouTube, you may also write down your comments in the comment section of our YouTube channel, CRCS UGM. And for those of you who want to speak, I will allow you to turn on your mic and you may speak later during the discussion session. So without further ado, Pak Iqbal, you have 45 minutes maximum as usual for your presentation, and then the rest of the time for discussion. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pak Iqbal Ahnaf.
All right. Thank you, Mas Aziz. Good afternoon, selamat siang, teman-teman semua. First of all, I would like to thanks for our friends at CRCS and ICRS for having me for this very prestigious events, Wednesday Forum, and all our friends who are attending here on Zoom and on YouTube. Today I would like to talk about an organization which was very popular in the past, but I'm not sure that if everyone's remember these organizations today. Yeah, the name of the organization is Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. Sometimes people are know better the founder of the organization rather than the organizations, because now people are confused. You have this Mujahidin Indonesia Timur, but you also have Majelis Mujahidin, and maybe there are also others organization by the name of Mujahidin. So this is an organization which is actually quite familiar for CRCS community. Maybe not this last year, last years, but because Majelis Mujahidin has some contact with CRCS. We remember in 2016 or 17, I think, or earlier than that, actually, groups coming from Majelis Mujahidin came to CRCS and required CS2S to cancel one of discussion at CRCS. So, and also not CRCS, but some other organizations. So this is an organization which is actually maybe in the minds of some of our friends at CRCS. So let me start with the background. So I propose this topic because I just published a chapter in a book published by Routledge in cooperation with the Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang University, Nanyang Technological University. So numbers of young Muslim scholars were invited to write in these chapters with the hope that these scholars on Islamic movement in Indonesia will provide some kind of updates to the recent rise of Islamism in Indonesia and what is also called in this book as conservatism. So this book was published months ago, maybe less than a month ago, was launched by Routledge, I think 3 weeks ago, and then now it's already available on online stores. But some people already got very advanced getting the PDF of the book. So many authors of this book actually are writing about the so-called rise of Islamism or Islamic conservatism in Indonesia. Especially, I think everyone's were quite attracted by changing religious landscape that is happening in Indonesia, not only since the 2012 rallies, but also in the preceding years. I think there has been concern about the changing landscape of Muslims in Indonesia, that moderate polarized base of civil society in Indonesia is eroding, and the influence of Islamist groups is getting stronger and stronger. So I call this the alarmist views. And if you happen to have seen the chapters of the book, you will see the profiles of different Islamist organizations in Indonesia. And many of those actually are proposing some kind of an alarmist point of view, which suggests that actually we are in the situations where the threat of Islamism is getting stronger and stronger in Indonesia. So I chose to select one organization which I think is showing an opposite trend. Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. I will show how the trends of decline is apparent in these organizations, but I think it is important, I think, to look at this side of the dynamic of Islamist movement to get a more balanced pictures. We have to look at these organizations, not necessarily not underestimate their potential of growth and influence, and they might be in the future they can really overturn the religious landscape in Indonesia. But I think we have to be more nuanced in looking at this development, and I think there are cases where Islamist movement are actually beginning to decline. I think it's not only Majelis Mujahidin in Indonesia, but some newer organizations which were popular in the past. It was not much heard today anymore. So, but I took the example of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia because I think Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia is one of the key players in the advocacy for Sharia in Indonesia after the fall of Suharto in 1998. So once a key player in Sharia advocacy. So founded in 2000s, soon after the fall of Suharto. So one of the organization which was, which started with a very high profiles gatherings in Yogyakarta and Solo at that time. I think I was still undergraduate student at that time, finishing my undergraduate, and so I was able to, because the opening of the launching of the organization was held in Mandala Wanita Tama building, followed by a large gathering Tabligh Akbar in Solo, and so that's near the UIN's campus. So I've been witnessing how the atmosphere at that time, people will get a sense this can be the future of Indonesia. So and especially it's become very popular at that time because of the influence of very widely respected leaders and ideologue of Islamists in Indonesia, Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, before he was arrested and put in jail until today. So, and for me, I understand the founding of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia as a legal arms, as a legal struggles of the Darul Islam ideology. So because Abu Bakar Ba'asyir, Abdullah Sungkar, who escaped Indonesia because of the regime repression by Suharto, and then once they returned to Indonesia, and they founded, both Ba'asir and Sungkar founded the Al-Mu'min Pesantren in Merauke, and then they also soon actually established this legal organization, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. So I think it is very clear that Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia was founded with the purpose of seizing the political opening, that political opportunity that is opens after the fall of Suharto. They are aware that they cannot do that during the time of Suharto. When Suharto failed, they can sense the opportunity. So they want to establish this legal arms for the propagations of Sharia in Indonesia. So that's, I think, the main purpose of, even though it does not mean that they completely eschew the violence ideology of Darul Islam, but they want to prioritize on this legal advocacy. And that's why the shift in rhetoric from establishing an Islamic state, for the rhetoric is, is not about establishing Daulah Islamiyah, Islamic state, though but they found a new term, tatbiq Sharia, or implementation of Sharia, or in different other situations, they also use the word formalisasi Sharia Islam in Indonesia. So tatbiq Sharia. So it's, I mean, people will not see much different in that, but actually in the rhetoric, they want to avoid the accusations that it is a rebel organization, that it want to overthrow the ideology of the state. So instead of challenging Pancasila, instead of challenging democracy, they want to to promote the idea of establishing Sharia within the framework of political system in Indonesia. As MA portrayed itself as a coordinating body for Muslim fight for Sharia in Indonesia, so they want to become like an umbrella organization where different group of Muslim will join their organization and contribute, and together they will form a kind of a coalitions to promote Shariatizations in Indonesia. Some of their key narrative, and which I think can still be found today, is that Muslim right to implement Sharia is guaranteed by Article 29 of the Constitution. So they really want to portray itself as a legal organization. So Sharia should be guaranteed under the clause of freedom of religions in Indonesian Constitution. So Muslims should have right to propagate Sharia, to implement Sharia, because this is part of the freedom of religions guaranteed by the constitutions. As majority, Muslims should have a special right in government, and they would cite means the history of Indonesia, how Muslims is fighting for independence from the Dutch, and how the Muslim hero, etc., and Muslim is the majority. Sharia law protect minority and reduce crime, create prosperity. So they want to show this, because they want to to counter the accusation is, if Sharia is implemented in Indonesia, then the right of minority, the right of non-Muslim will be violated. So they really try to make an argument that Sharia will protect minority. And even so, if Sharia is implemented in Indonesia, areas where majorities are non-Muslim will also be allowed under the Constitution of Indonesia to implement religious laws based on the laws of the religious majorities in that area. Even though they will say that, well, they don't have that kind of a fixed law like Sharia, like Islam, but if they want, they can do that. So that's how they try to convince the public, you are safe on you are safe under this Sharia narrative in Indonesia. Nothing should be worried about that. Key resources, of course, most important resources for Majelis Mujahidin is the leaders, charisma of Abu Bakar Ba'asyir. But Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia is also one of the organizations which has a very effective publishing house at that time. Not anymore today, but at that time, it has some of its top leaders are very productive writers, like Irfan Awas, Muhammad Toleh, two of the most productive writers in Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. They publish so many books, and they publish with the press and other publishing houses, which actually sells very well at that time, to the extent that they established a very quite large store in Yogyakarta because of the selling of the book. So At that time, publishing houses is one important resource of Majelis Mujahidin. They have national networks, including the network of the Nguruki boarding school in some places in Indonesia, and also the Laskars. So this uh, okay. So what is Hizbut Tahrir? Sorry, I'm confused with this organization because I did research on these two organizations. So Majelis Mujahidin. So the theory of change. I read the platforms in the websites of the organization. I try to understand, to interpret what is the trajectory, what is the strategy. So I try to understand and divide it into three steps. The first is uh, provide Sharia platforms by writing a practical guide on how to implement Sharia, and that's why they also wrote some kind of some kind of constitutions, Syariah laws of Indonesia, like the KUHP, the Indonesian Penal Law, based on Syariah, for example. So practical guides on how to implement Sharia. This is quite similar with Hizbut Tahrir because Hizbut Tahrir has also been portrayed itself as the intellectual wings of Muslim by providing a practical, a clear, a specific guidance on how to implement Sharia laws in one state. So Majelis Mujahidin try to provide that, and there is one book published by Hizbut Tahrir on the Sharia constitutions. And after they providing this practical guide, this is what to implement, this is what to do. They want to establish what might be called as best practices of Sharia implementations. You have to give example. What happens if Sharia law is implemented? What is good of Sharia law? You want to show the best practice. In that way, there will be public confidence of Sharia. You have to convince people if Sharia is implemented, Sharia law is implemented, the crime can be reduced. The people can be more prosperous. The minority will be protected, etc. So they want to counter these accusations, negative labeling against Sharia by providing best practices, and that's why their most important program at that time is promoting Perda Sharia bylaws in many places in Indonesia, because they hope that by getting more examples of good practices in Sharia bylaws, people will be convinced. Oh yeah, we have a good example of Sharia. Let's replicate that in many places. So that's how they actually play around, because it is always historically it is difficult in Indonesia to start Sharia from the top, from the national constitution, because even the top of Jakarta Charter in the parliament has never been favoring the Islamist aspiration. So they want to play the game from the margins by surrounding Indonesia with effective, efficient, successful practices of Sharia law, and because of that, they want to persuade those at the center to adopt similar standards. And in that way, they would believe that the Ummah will be ready, mobilize material support for larger Sharia implementation in Indonesia. If you look at this compare this with the theory of change of Hizbut Tahrir, there are some similarities, but there are some differences, because if Hizbut Tahrir will not support the step 2, ideologically, Hizbut Tahrir will not support the step 2, because for Hizbut Tahrir, it is impossible to implement Sharia without changing the existing political system. So promoting Sharia will only actually delegitimize the movement, because it will only convince the public that the political system is legitimate, and that's why the step 2 will be the point of difference between Hizbut Tahrir and Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. Even though Hizbut Tahrir is not necessarily confrontational against the promotions of Perda Syariah, because sometimes they want to play safe, not attacking Perda Syariah, but actually ideologically such partial legislation is not helpful for the movement, for the revolution that they are looking for. So so the theory of a change and his Majelis Mujahidin has been mobilizing in many places, and one of their key achievement, I think, was the Committee for the Preparation of the Implementation of Sharia, or in Bahasa Indonesia it is abbreviated into KPPSI, Komite Persiapan Pelaksanaan Syariah Islam. It was started, I think, in South Sulawesi, in Makassar, but I think it was also replicated in many places in Indonesia. The committee was, coalitions between different leaders of Muslim, and they were committed. Actually, sometimes it include leaders of the government, local governments, to promote the implementation of Perda Syariah. And in 6 years, 2000 and 2006, I used the data from Robin Bush. Over 80 Syariah inspired by law was enacted in maybe more than 52 districts or cities in Indonesia. So there was a kind of enthusiasm at that time because of the examples of Sharia in Indonesia. And for Majelis Mujahid at that time, we do it. We can do it. There are this is mushrooming. There are people. There is a growing interest in Sharia. People copying the Perda, and the Perda was made in one place. It was exactly copied and implemented in different places, in Tasikmalaya, in Bulukumba, in Aceh, in Padang, etc. There are many similar. So it's like it's like snowballing effects of the enthusiasms for Perda Sharia at that time. So, and that's why this is how Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia describe its achievement. I quote it from the writing of the leaders of Majelis Mujahidin, Irfan Awas. Thanks to God, the outcome of Mujahidin Congress led to a demand in implementing Sharia occur in many regions. The province of South Sulawesi is pioneer in this, where the demand for a Sharia has been supported by all Muslim organizations as well as numbers of regional House of Representatives. This was followed by the enthusiasm for implementing Sharia in Tasikmalaya, West Java. The issuance of the district bylaws on the prohibitions of vice, pornography, alcohol, drug was readily implemented. A series of similar regulations followed in other districts. We saw demand for Sharia in many districts in West Java, including Cianjur, Garut, and others. This was followed by Riau, Palembang, Banten, Pamekasan, in Madura. In the last region, the demand for Sharia implementation was even led by the head of the local government. So they can see this is indicating the result. So and I think at that times in the short period over 6 years, I think there should be reasons for Majelis Mujahidin and other Islamist group to celebrate that, compared to the difficulties of gaining grounds for this during the Suharto's era. So, but then after that, in 2008, something very serious happened in the organizations, in the structures of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. Abu Bakar Basir left and founded a new organization by the name of Jamaah Ansarut Tauhid. More extreme organizations because of the fact that many members of Jamaah Ansarut Tauhid was arrested for terrorism charge, and Basir was the founder of the organization after he left Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. And that's because of the central positions of Majelis Abu Bakar Basir. So the departure of Abu Bakar Basir gave much effect on the influence, on the popularity of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. Even though means they're not necessarily disengaged each other, sometimes they also be communicating to each others, but I think the departure of Abu Bakar Basir is not done for practical reason only, but also for a strategic reasons. And there is a sense of a strife, divisions in the strategy of the movement that motivated Basir to leave Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. So MM leader claimed Basir left because he could not get support for an absolute authority as an Amir. So that's how leaders of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia talk to the public about why Ba'asir left, and because Ba'asir want to assume that as an Amir I should have absolute authority, but there was some kind of demand for democratization in the structure of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia, and that's why then Abu Bakar Ba'asir choose to leave. We don't know exactly. I never talked to talk to the leaders specifically on this topic, but based on our reading on the statement, the activities, we can make an interpretations. And I think it is possible that it is for strategic reasons. GIT engaged in extremist activities. Many were arrested for terrorism charge, and it's my reflect the Bashir's disoriented disappointment with the limited achievement. You can only do this perda in that place. Where do we do? Where can we go with this perda? How much change can we expect from this? This number of perda in Indonesia, and so there must be disappointment, and that. So there is he see is limited achievement in and disorient factions within the organizations, some including Ba'asir, returns to their true colors, extremism. After Ba'asir left, MME relied on the limited influence of new leaderships. Now the new Amir is a man called Muhammad Talib, and still the chairman is Irfan Awas, and also one important leader, I think, who is also sitting in the legislative council of the organization is Abu Jibril, Irfan Awas brothers. So I think this trio, I think, is the most influenced individual in the current leadership of this of Majelis Mujahidin: Muhammad Talib, Irfan Awas, and Abu Jibril. And you can see these three leaders just cannot be compared to the popularity of Bashir. So what does it mean by declining? When I say that why Islamist movement die, does not mean that it's dead, it no longer exists, but it's starting to be declining, to die down, losing influence, losing significance, and maybe also losing memberships. So the first sign, I think, is the decline of interest in Sharia bylaws. I know some scholars might challenge this view, but at least I think Robin Bush in his article has recorded, at least the stagnancy of the emergence of new Perda Syariah since 2008 or 2007. Actually, the number of Perda Syariah enacted is not showing any signs of accelerating. There may be 1-2 new regions which implement Perda Syariah, but the other also lost Perda Syariah. So some Perda Syariah which were actually implemented, they are no longer active. So, for example, one of the best examples cited by Islamist group, including Majelis Mujahidin, as a best example of Perda Syariah is the city of Bulukumba in South Sulawesi. I visited that city a long time ago when it was very popular as look, there is a one region in Indonesia which was successful in implementing Sharia. Since Perda Syariah was implemented, the crime was reduced. The people become more prosperous because of the zakat, charity required by the civil servant, etc. So it was really actually hailed as an example of best practice of Sharia bylaws in Indonesia. I visited that time, and actually people were enthusiastic, but not everyone. And then eventually, actually, I think it's just the sign of decline because people started to understand the political interest behind the Sharia. It's actually played by the local politicians to cover themselves. And once the political allies that support the Sharia bylaws no longer in power, the Sharia bylaws also losing significance, and sometimes it was no longer, even though it might be still there, but it was no longer enforced. So just if your best example is no longer best example, then there will be question for that. KPPSI is losing role. I'm not sure if we still heard the name KPPSI today. Maybe you heard, but it's really not, not something that can be considered as influential player today. KPPSI. You can still see maybe the names, but I think there are many other organizations which I think are more popular than KPPSI. MMI no longer able to organize large rallies. Recent annual Mujahidin Congress were held in a modest building style. So in the past, it used to be organized in the large public akbar in stadium or in lapangan alun-alun. But they could no longer do that this day because, of course, it is not always easy to mobilize such a big gathering. So they choose just small, modest house, and I think this is a very clear example. A very clear, marks. Well, it's not as big as before these organizations. The absence of events in Yogyakarta headquarters. The headquarters of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia is in Yogyakarta. It was in Jalan Veteran before, but now moved in Kota Gede, I think. And I follow the websites, and then not much activities publicized in the headquarters. So it's also a sign of the decline. They do sporadic resorts to violent vigilantism by Laskar Mujahidin, like what happened to the against Irshad Manzi and other places. But there was a sporadic, and sometimes it was not really sustained. Closure of publishing store. Now the stores in Jalan Kusumanegara is no longer open. It's closed. It was actually a very good store at that time, but it's just not there. And even if you look at the websites, the posting are often quite outdated. This is actually the Risalah Mujahidin, one of the very important. Actually, it was quite prestigious publications of Mujahidin. Irfan Awas was actually arrested and actually sent to jail, among other because of his role in the majalah Risalah Mujahidin. And the latest editions was actually in 2015, which was posted in the website. So I'm not sure if they're still publishing this anymore. They still do publish taking in the website, short news, etc., comment, etc. But the serious publications of the content is no longer very routine, I think. So I think these are some of the signs of declines. That does not mean that it's no longer active. You can still see people in there, and they still do updated the websites, but I think it's not as active as before. Paradoxes and confusions. Support MME support 2012 rally, but warns against relying on the false power of the mass. So I mean, I would consider this as a confusion, because actually, on one side it participates in the Aksi 212, but on the other side it also criticized that. It's not sure whether this is really leading to a significant change, because one very strong statement come from Irfan Awas after the serial Aksi 212. I'm not sure which series, but it writes an essay, and which actually criticized that and warns that it's only buih di dalam lautan, it's a false power, and we cannot really rely on the power of the mass. We have to really focus on what we really want to achieve in our the concrete change, not only about if we are a gathering organization, gathering mass large number of people, but what is really concrete in implementing Sharia in Indonesia. So actually it's quite while participating, MME and its leader are actually quite critical on the Aksi 212. it attempted to exploit the 212 euphoria by selling the idea of Islamic Revolutions Council, but failed. So uh, the idea of Dewan Revolusi Islam, the name is maybe remind us of Dewan Revolusi Islam Iran, yeah. So I'm not sure if they intentionally choose that similar name, but there is once idea coming from a number of people, not from everyone, not from all the leaders of Aceh 212, but from some. Most prominently, I think from Muhammad Al-Khattab and Abu Jibril. Abu Jibril is one of the leader of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. Even sometimes it is difficult to differentiate whether Abu Jibril is acting on behalf of MFE or acting on behalf of himself. But actually, we cannot deny that Abu Jibril carry the name of the organization Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. So this is they throw this idea, establishing, include putting names of leaders who will be the cabinet of the Dewan Revolusi Islam, and it was not much talk. I think it was just throw there, and some people talk about this little bit, but it's no longer in the surface anymore. So and I think this is part of the attempt of the leader of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia to make a more concrete move from the euphoria of 212 movement, but it is not working. So no one's follow up this idea. It's maintained a big part of this confusion and paradox. The organizations also maintain, while on many places, Irfan Awas, try to distance itself from the extremists, especially after the pledge of allegiance to ISIS by Abu Bakar Ba'asir, which was later denied, but the picture's already there. So the association with ISIS was criticized by leaders of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. They said we should not sacrifice the soul of our member for something that is not clear. So really, they do not want to do activities, risky, violent, that will sacrifice the life of their Laskar, their member, without substantial reason. So it's a criticism to extremist ideology but the confusion is clear by the fact that at the same time, Majelis Mujahidin leader also maintain relationship with the other factions of the armed struggle of extremist group. In this case, is Jabhah al-Nusrah in Iraq and Syria. We know the contest between ISIS and Jabhah al-Nusrah in Syria, and it is very clear. Majelis Mujahidin leaders we can read from the publications in their website, they taking side on Jabhah al-Nusrah. And at what point there is actually a report published in the website that Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia was sending a delegations for the equal as that wal jihad. It's a preparations for a battle, like that tour to Syria and maybe to Iraq also, and they visited talked to the leaders of Jabhah al-Nusra in that place. So they also organized that tour as well. So they maintain, while they could criticize the extremist expressions of group like ISIS, but they also try to maintain the relation with other factions of the extremist group. While at the same time, the leaders of MMI promote what they call as perjuangan, a struggle with otak, our brain, or otot, the struggle with muscle, while at the same time glorify terrorist organizations. So glorify, publications, books, pictures that glorify extremist terrorist members are also still quite presence in the websites of MME. So why declining? I would propose these two reasons, and I'm not sure if I use the right terms. I think the first explanation, I think, is the internal dynamics. The first, I think, is the leadership divisions. I think we cannot deny I mean, the most important resources of the mobilizations for Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia is the figure of Abu Bakar Basir. After Abu Bakar Basir left, Irfan Awas and Muhammad Talib, they are well known, but they are not as popular as Abu Bakar Basir. So their mobilizing strategy is quite actually quite conventional in a sense, because they are like leaders of the past. They are not leaders in the future. So with new leaderships, and one of the reasons why this leadership is not as strong as expected is because the capacity to adapt with the new media. So I mean, if you compare, for example, to Hizbut Tahrir and other new organizations, they are, very creative. Or maybe the Hijrah communities, for example, they are quite creative. If you compare, for example, figure like Irfan Awas to new figure like Felix Xiao, for example, you can see how this represent different generations. And within Hizbut Tahrir, within Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia, the new generations of leaders is now emerging. So that's why I think to some extent it was quite out of date, are unable to adapt with the new demands of the new markets of the Muslim. And the second, I think, is state repressions or law enforcement by the state. Ba'asir was in prisons. Maybe if Ba'asir was no longer in MME, but if he was outside, he might still be able to help MME in different way. But since Ba'asir was in prison, so once key assets of this community of Islamists are gone. Arrest of JLT members, terrorist crackdowns, and this affect because there is always overlap between group like MME and jihadist organizations, and some of them are part of the Laskar, etc. When some were arrested, actually puts more pressures on the organizations. Fragile allies with political allies in promoting Sharia bylaws. As I mentioned before, the KPPSI, the Perda Sharia require the organizations to build alliance with the local political leaders, and this alliance with local political leader is not stable, because we understand the nature of politicians in Indonesia. They will support something as long as it is beneficial for them, and if they are no longer in power and they no longer need that kind of asset, then they will no longer have interest in supporting that. So building that kind of alliance is fragile, and that's why it's fair. It's not. It is difficult to sustain and reduce resource of mobilizations. And I mean, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia is not. And I think if you talk about resource mobilizations, these days, one of very important resource mobilization is financing, yeah, and charity organizations. And I think compared to groups like Salafi, for example, or the Tarbiyah movement, actually, Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia could not compete in mobilizing public fund, lembaga-lembaga amal. And sometimes the Laskar might, gain political concession from local political elites, but that is not, not always sustainable. But they are not as active as the other Islamist groups in mobilizing resource in terms of the finance. So I think this can also be a problem. Of course, they do that. I mean, I'm not sure if you go to Solo, for example, there are some strong, successful Badan Amal in Solo with link to members of the Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. But just I think there was a unique situations in Solo, because Solo is the birthplace of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. So there are many activists who join Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia, but also join other organizations. So I think these are, I think some of the explanations why Mujahidin Indonesia is declining. I think there is a role of how the states responds to the nature of the organization, but also the internal dynamic of the organizations. I quote this from a book which I found not just recently, a book written by Christian Danforth, How Social Movements Die. So that's why my title is quite similar. because I think this book is very inspiring and to explain if we understand social movement, we should not look at social movement as a stable organization. They depend on different factors, and there is shifting waters in the way the movement gain momentum for their mobilization. So Christian Davenport used this phrase: "The state can kill a movement, but a movement can kill itself by failing to sustain participations." And I think in the case of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia, both the role of the state and actually the ability of the movement to sustain participation could play a role. And if Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia can sustain the idea of Perda Syariah, and people are continue to be optimistic about Perda Syariah, maybe they will be able to stay. But Perda Syariah has been quite stagnant in Indonesia. And the last point that I would like to raise here, I think, is has been a debate in Indonesia on whether or not radicalism or tolerance is the result of the so-called weak state, or the absence of the state. We often say that, when there is attack against minority, when there is intolerance, when there is violence, people say, where is the state? So the state is weak, the state is unable to respond to that. But I think if you look at this, I think often is the reverse. Actually, it's not the intolerance, vigilantism is not, sometimes it's not because of the state are unable to enforce the law, but they are unwilling to enforce the law. In other way, the state become enabling factor to the ability of the Islamist group to mobilize. And I think the history of Islamism in Indonesia, we can see actually often their growth, their mobilization is often possible because of the facilitations of the state by building alliance, especially I think, of course, in the past 15 years, many groups like Hizbut Tahrir, for example, they are able to build alliance with local political leaders, including Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia. When such a political alliance comes, they lost the ground, they lost the resources. So, and I think I would suggest that we should explain intolerance and radicalisms not only uh, the result of the weak of the state, but also actually the active role of the state without necessarily promoting the ideas, but it's helping, it's facilitating the mobilization of the Islamist group in Indonesia. And I think it still happen today, even though the regime have changed. Actually, we can see, for example, charity organization, philanthropy organization, which have a link to Islamist group. Many of them are still taking benefit from concessions, collaboration with the state, national companies, even local government. They got a lot of funding through charity fund. And I think this is part of the enabling role of the states in the mobilization of Islamisms in Indonesia. And I think I will end in there, and I look for the questions from our audience. Thank you, Mas Aziz.
Thank you so much, Pak Iqbal, for the presentation. I think we have a lot of insights here to derive from Pak Iqbal talk about what are the factors that contribute to the decline of a movement, how social movements die. That is the title of the book that was shown in the last slide, Pak Iqbal's last slide, and also whether it is because of the weak state that social movements became prominent, or actually that the state is allowing them or actually taking benefits from them. All right, let's have a discussion. Those of you who want to ask, or you want to speak, by turning on your mic, you may raise your virtual hands and I will allow you to speak. Or you can also write down your questions in the chat box. There is already one here in the chat box from Mas Andreas ICRS. Thank you for your presentation, Pak Iqbal. Perhaps my question is out of topic, but I'm really curious whether there is a connection between the declining Islamic movement and the thought of Sayyid Qutb in his Social Justice in Islam, which seems to be controversial. At the end of his book published in 50s, he clearly mentioned Indonesia and Pakistan as two great new Islamic blocs in Asia. Is Sayyid Qutb really influential to the Indonesian Islamic movements? Please elaborate that. Yeah, baiklah.
Right. Yeah. I think Aziz can also answer the questions. Well, Sayyid Qutb is a very important figures among the Islamists, but not all Islamists. And Sayyid Qutb, I think, is is the ideologue. There are two figures which are quite often be put together with Sayyid Qutb and Hasan al-Banna. So if you read Sayyid Qutb and Hasan al-Banna, these are actually the ideologue of an Islamist organization founded in Egypt. The name is Muslim Brotherhood. So Sayyid Qutb's idea about that Muslims should leave the era of darkness and establish the light, and by establishing a political movement, put the foundations for the movement called Muslim Brotherhood. But I think a substantiality, even though Sayyid Qutb and Hasan al-Banna are the ideologue of this particular organization, Muslim Brotherhood. By the way, Muslim Brotherhood becomes like a movement that founded a political party in Egypt. But one idea which I think is quite universal coming from Sayyid Qutb is the unity between Din and Daulah, between religions and the state, between the church and the state, between the Sangha and the state, etc., the Dharma and the Sangha. So if you compare to other religions, so this is the ideology which I think is supersede one particular organization's Muslim Brotherhood. In Indonesia, Muslim Brotherhood transforms into a movement called Tarbiyah. And Tarbiyah was, the mothers of a political party, PKS. And so it is, if you say that, what is the effect of Sayyid Qutb? I think the effect is mostly popular among those connected to Tarbiyah, PKS, and Muslim Brotherhood. But the idea of the unity between Islam, Din, and Daulah, I think is also something that is also followed by other organizations. But Sayyid Qutb will not be someone who is followed by the Salafists, because Salafists will not see Hasan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb as their leaders. They will see their sheikh, their mufti in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere as their leader, other than the Sayyid Qutb. So it's not something that is influential anywhere, Mas Andreas.
All right. Any other question?
Me, Mas.
Yeah, Mas Haris.
Thank you so much.
Would you show your face?
Sorry, maybe I cannot. I'm sorry.
Are you in Warung Kopi now?
Yeah, I am.
Please go
I
ahead.
just can demonstrate with my audio only. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. I see that the birth of religious radical groups is a response to disappointment with the role of the state. And another reason for the emergence for the radicalism movement is the failure of the secular regime to formulate policies and implement the policies to people's life. So they build Sharia law to expect the better life for society. And we know many groups guarding Islamic law in our country. And my question is whether these movements that want the implementation of Islamic law, do they have the same paradigm of Islamic Sharia or the Sharia system? Or the Sharia system things are different from each other, from their group? For example, HTI, which really wants to enter the government, or MMI, which only want to apply the Perda Sharia, or what is it like? And my second question is about why did they set up their respective groups? I mean that why don't they just become one group underlined by the same ambition to establish the Sharia? The logical argument is that they become much much stronger if they merge into one big huge body in one organization. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me respond to the first questions. Maybe Mas Aziz can remind me the second questions later. But the first questions, I think, is radicalism, Islamism is the result of the failure of the state in delivering justice and prosperity to the people. It can be, but I think it's not enough to explain in that way. I mean, with the so-called the failure of the secular government, I think you can, the rebellions against the secular government, and I think we can see that in many places where populism is growing, not only in the Islamic context, but you can see, for example, in the rise of BJP in India, for example. I think part of the attractions of BJP is, I think, because the disorientations among the people to the secular democracy of India, and they want to see more religious authorities in the state. So BJP is gaining power in that. But I think we should not confuse that by suggesting that there is a correlation between poverty and radicalism. Because if we look at the profile of those attracted to Islamist or radical group, maybe especially the Islamist group actually is not the poor, but it's quite popular among the urban, middle class, in even upper class communities. So what kind of justice is questioned in this case? What kind of economic demand is questioned in this case? If you look at this profile of those, many of those attracted to the Islamist group, and I think there is a difference between justice and perceived, between injustice and perceived injustice. There's a difference in that. So I think the rise of the Islamist group, among other, is not necessarily the result of the failure of the state in providing the need of the people, but in the success on the side of the Islamist group to create a narrative that the state has been failing, that the system is failing. That's the narrative that is powerful. So it's about whether or not, it's about the context of the narrative. So that's what creates a perceived failure of the secular government in many states. And I think it is also important to not generalizing the nature of Islamist group in Indonesia, because there is a different constituency between Hizbut Tahrir and FPI. Hizbut Tahrir is popular, especially among students, urban, middle class. But Hizbut Tahrir is not popular among the people in the village, people who are at the lower level, etc., maybe educated in religious circles. But if you look at group like FPI, it attracted urban poor community, not because FPI promise the ideal of Sharia necessarily, but because group like FPI can become like a broker in delivering in distributed quote unquote justice to the people by securing concessions from state actor, and it's delivered to the urban communities. So there is a difference in that. I think it's not as simple that it is a response to the failure of the secular governments, but it's more about how the Islamists were able, to construct narrative to label secular government with the problem in the daily life of the community. That, I think that's a response to the first question. I'm not sure about the second question because it's really not very clear to me.
The second question was about why don't they merge into just one movement? So why do they establish their own organizations if
Yeah,
their goal is the same?
yeah, it's a sunnatullah, I think. It's sunnatullah. That's everything. You know, you can expect unity in the social movement, and especially often social movement will be divided not when they lost, but when they win. When they win, they started to be divided. And actually, why Basir left Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia in 2008? 2008 actually can be considered as the peak of Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia because at that time enthusiasm for Perda Syariah is quite good, but Basir see that as not enough. They don't see these perdas as leading to a significant change, and that's why he want something more radical, something that is more more ideal to the in the eyes of Basir. So there are many factors why there are divisions within Islamist organizations. Often divisions is not necessarily about strategy, about ideology, but something also internal competitions, leaderships. We remember how there is a one important man in the structure of Hizbut Tahrir, very influential man, Muhammad Al-Khattab, and it was he actually who led a band of people leaving Hizbut Tahrir. Why was that? I think it's not because Al-Khattab no longer agree with Hizbut Tahrir ideologically, but I think because of a struggle of power within the organizations. So yeah, and I think that is not unique to Islamist organization, and that is not what I think it can happen in moderate Islamist civil organizations. So it can happen anywhere. But the context of Islamist organizations, I think we can divide the reasons into ideology and pragmatic. And I think often it's not only in ideological term, but also in power struggle within their organizations can also be very influential.
Next question in the chat box from Daniel Sutami. Thank you for your presentation, Pak Iqbal. I am wondering, are there currently any potential figures who can emerge to be the next charismatic leader like Abu Bakar Bashir?
Yeah, very good questions, and I'm not sure if I can predict that. I don't see anyone yet so far. Perhaps we can expect that will be coming from Habib Rizik Sihab, yeah. But Habib Rizik Sihab is also have a scope of influence, a radius of influence, I think so. And Rizik Sihab is also often compromising a pragmatic figure, so he can also be disappointing for some of those who are trying to really consistently follow the ideology. So and Abu Bakar Ba'asir is also influential, but his influence is also not unlimited. Yeah, so I don't think we can find someone who is at the same caliber of Abu Bakar Ba'asir, but we can see some figures who will be important in the future of Islamist organizations in the long terms. And we can give names like Bakhtiar Nasir, for example. I'm not sure. Bakhtiar Nasir, I think, will be very important person in the future because of his ability to maneuver to different different spectrums of Islamic organizations. Even though Bakhtiar Nasir come from a specific background, but I think I would suggest that if despite his relatively absence from the public these days after the 212, but he is choosing a more quiet path in this case. It's not like this noisy path chosen by Habib Rizik Sihab, but this a more effective, quiet movement conducted by figure like Bakhtiar Nasir, I think will be more important to look than just public figure which influence can be sporadic like Habib Rizik Sihab, yeah, and because uh, figure like Bakhtiar Nasir is someone who can build the structure of a movement by organizing a network, by setting up charity organization, and if you are able to sustain this charity organization in the long future, that you can make something very serious in the futures. But sometimes Islamist movement do not depend on individual figures. Like Salafism, for example, Salafism do not depend on individual figure. It's not like FPI, for example, which idealize charismatic leaders like Habib Rizik Sihab, but the networks of Salafist organizations, the Mahats, the charity organizations of Salafis, they are quite large and quite wide and quite solid, and I think that is more important to look rather than the influence of a popular figure like that. So yeah, that's my response.
Another question from YouTube from Muhammad Ainun Najib. With the imprisonment of Habib Rizik Shihab and other leaders of FPI and the tough measures of the Jokowi government to suppress religious radicalism, is FPI facing the same fate as Majelis Mujahidin?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, I'm not a fan of repressive measures, but I think uh, uh, law enforcement will be very important. And sometimes these law enforcements are not very legitimate. But I think the mobilization of Islamist groups in the past was the result of the the response of the state, which chose to accommodate them rather than to enforce the law against them. So I think enforcement of the law against the violent uh, expressions of Islamist group will give a very important effects in preventing their mobilization. So and by law enforcement is not necessarily about violence, physical violent expressions, but I think it's also the policies that favors a more moderate Muslim expression rather than the militant Muslim expression. Because at present, I think there are still many segments of the government which are still quite open to the network of these Islamist organizations, because sometimes because they don't understand. I think there are still places where where the governor invited figure like Felix Xiao, for example, not because of he is a fan of Felix Xiao, but because he doesn't understand who is the Felix Xiao. I mean, so he's in popular figures. He is there in Instagram. There are many young people who like him, and then there's a governor or a mayor who like to, popularity, and then they invite these people. It's not necessarily about the ideology, but sometimes this is, there is some in there are many segments of the state which are still, open to them. So by the response of the state does not mean necessarily about enforcing the laws against the violent expressions of the Islamist group, but about it is a politic about space. How does to what extent does the state provide, enough, allow enough space for the mobilizations of hit within the state bureaucracy or in other public spheres. So I think if the state is inconsistent in enforcing the laws against the violent expressions of the Islamists, that might be enough to prevent their mobilizations. We can still see now many cases of when groups like FPI in Aceh, for example, in the last case, they forcefully close the building of a church, for example, and the state allow that to happen, and that's actually helping them. So yeah, so we have to admit, I think that the way state respond to them will also determine whether or not they will fail like Majelis Mujahidin Indonesia.
Okay. Now there is a long question from Michael. I think this is Pak Michael Northcott.
Why don't Pak Michael talk?
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, Pak Michael, yeah, you can talk. If your question is too long, we let Mas Aziz rest.
It's two parts, so have a look, see what you think.
Are you in Bali or in Jogja?
I'm in Georgia,
Oh,
waiting for the immigration department to take my photograph. They've taken 6 months to organize the photograph. I don't quite know what's holding them up, but anyway.
good luck.
It's Jakarta administration for you. So what do you think? In Bali, there are people who believe the Bali was...
Let me read it for the people on YouTube, yeah.
Can you not hear me? Can you not hear me?
No.
Can you not hear me?
No.
Not very clear. It was clear before, Michael, but not now.
How about now? I turned the video off.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I have met some long-standing residents in Bali who know, quite influential people who did not believe the Bali bombing was organized just by the group that is said to have organized it, and that there was, frankly, intelligence involvement. We know this is the case with the Muslim Brotherhood. It was begun by a British spy. She wrote the book about it afterwards to discredit Egyptian nationalism. We know that Al-Qaeda was set up by the CIA. They even coined the phrase Al-Qaeda. It means chaos, I think, in Arabic. And then they set it up. We know now, because all the documents have recently come out in the UK, that the British government, the American government, and Saudi Arabia set up and funded ISIS to destabilize and remove Assad. I'm no fan of Assad, but this is just fact, though it's still challenged by the BBC, The Guardian, the New York Times, all the usual so-called liberal progressive media. So my question is, given that history, is it not conceivable that Al Jameer and the other groups that you spoke about were also assets of foreign intelligence agencies, and that because the tap has been turned off, principally under the influence of Donald Trump, because the money tap has been turned off, these groups are now thankfully declining here in Indonesia in influence. And they have, for example, Al Jameer has now to go around putting charity boxes in marketplaces, 13,000 charity boxes in marketplaces, because it's run out of foreign money. So it now puts these in public places, pretending it's collected for charity, whereas in fact, it's of course collecting for more terrorist activity. This was recently in the international news. So that's my question broadly. It's very, very close to your topic. It's not off topic. Follow the money.
It's
Who
not
pays
out
for
of it.
this? What?
Yeah, let me respond.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, I think that is quite classic questions, and I think the connection between jihadism, Islamism with the foreign government and not Muslim government but Western government, and I think that is the case when we talk about Al-Qaeda. Why Al-Qaeda is there in Afghanistan, and I think there is the foreign government hands in the Al-Qaeda, and perhaps also ISIS. That can also be the non-Muslim hands in the
Exactly.
in the ISIS. But not only ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but also could be the Salafism, could be Hizbut Tahrir. I mean,
Yeah.
if we learn about the history of Hizbut Tahrir, for example, who is Taqiyuddin An-Nabhani, and Taqiyuddin An-Nabhani was a socialist in the past, who joined a socialist movement, the Arab nationalists, the Baas Party. You know the socialist origin of the Baas Party, and that's the background of the founder of Hizbut Tahrir. And
Yeah.
but then maybe because the failure of the socialist Arab movement, the Arab nationalists, and then Bakirin Anabhani used the term khilafah, the more Islamic term, rather than the socialisms. So it's a shift actually. So yeah, I believe in the past, I'm not sure that there is a connection, the foreign government hands in many Islamist movement, including the Salafism, but I'm not sure today if that's still the case, Mike. And I think even if that's not the case, I think it's like a baby which was fed in the past and then was no longer fed, and it's live on his own now.
Yeah.
Already live on its own now. Like Salafism, if it's not I mean, we can talk about the Salafist organization in Indonesia got support from the Saudi money, from the charity organization linked to the Middle Eastern country, for example, in Qatar, in Kuwait, etc. So this charity money, they help the Salafist in Indonesia, founded mosque, founded Islamic boarding school, etc. And that's why they are quite fast in building mosque, building Islamic boarding school. Yes, it was the case, but maybe no longer, and they already established the strong base in Indonesia. Even if the financing is stopped, they already established their own life here in Indonesia. So that's, I think, what happened. I mean, this kind of alliance, I think, is not stable. That's something that happened in the past. It's also really something that has happened today. That's my report.
I suppose I just want to follow up. I mean, the reason I raise this partly is because of the issue of blame between different religious groups. I mean, the fact of the matter is that America and Britain are supposed to be majority Christian countries. And it's the Christians who paid for Islamic terrorism. And this is known to have been the case in Egypt, in Afghanistan, in the United States itself, in Syria. And my point is that recognizing that it's really imperialism and not religion can be helpful in the whole issue of dialogue. We talk a lot about tolerance and dialogue, and that was the big issue when the King of the Netherlands came. We were all discussing how to be more tolerant and deal with Salafism and so on. But if we actually recognize that there was a tap from the West that paid for this, then the danger is that we say, oh, it's our fault, Christians and Muslims, because they're not nice to each other. No, it's not true. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's my point. It's, if it's really imperialism, we need to name it as imperialism and not say it's religious when it's really imperialism. It's the misuse of religion for other purposes.
I agree with that. And I think it's a misuse of religions on the side of the many Islamist group as well. And I think a misuse of religions for political purpose. That is what is happening in many cases. Of course, it's not. It's not always the case. But I think as a political scientist, we would explain that the mobilizations of a social movement, including Islamist movement, will not always determined by their ideology, but also determined by what is so-called political opportunity structure. Extent to which they found allies within the existing period, and that's why we can learn, for example, the Jemaah Islamiyah in Egypt, for example, was very violent in one period, but it's very quiet in other period. FBI, for example, is very violent in one period, but it's quite quiet in the. And we can see now, especially what happened in Yogyakarta. There was a very dangerous vigilante Islamist group in Indonesia, from Islams and Forum Umat Islam and etc. They almost every month they found target a church or a community or individual they attack. But we have to acknowledge now that it has been very quiet in the last 2 or 3 years. What happened? They changed the
Well, you see,
ideology. Do they change the ideology? Maybe not, but because the structure
I
of
gave you an alternative explanation that which you haven't responded to, but it has been the clear aim of Donald Trump since he became president of the United States to stop Saudi Arabia funding terrorism in the Muslim world. It's his clear and declared aim. And he went to Saudi Arabia in 2018 on a not very widely publicized visit and basically told them that they in future had to do his bidding and stop doing this. Anyway, this I think may come out more fully in the next few weeks. But my point is maybe that's also an element. This was the first anti-globalist president. It was the first president who refused to let the CIA and the globalists carry on running the world, regardless of who is in the White House and regardless of the democratic will of the American people. Now, I'm not saying the UK's changed. I mean, we have evidence in the UK that the funding has gone on until very recently in Syria. But I do think, I guess the basic point I'm making is this is about political theory, perhaps more than religious studies. That's really the basic point. Yeah, and I think we agree on that. But thanks very much. Very interesting talk.
Thanks, Pak Mike.
Now the question, now from Suryaningsi Mila. Actually, I don't know much about Islamic movements, but I want more specific explanation about the goal of Islamic organizations. How can they struggle for the implementation of Sharia, which promotes justice for all people while supporting terrorism and extremism?
Yeah. Mbak siapa tadi? Mbak Ningsih. Yeah. Thank you for your questions. But I think if we talk about the goals of Islamist movement, and I think it is important to know that Islamist movement are not uniform. Yeah, they are not uniform in terms of their strategy, and not uniform also in terms of their objectives, their goals. Some Islamist group have a quite extreme goals of overthrowing democracy in Indonesia. They don't really believe in democracy in Indonesia, like Hizbut Tahrir, like Jemaah Islamiyah, like I'm not sure if FPI really believe in democracy, but at least so far, FPI has been actually supporting candidates in democracy. So, and also Islamist group like Tarbiyah movement, the PKS is quite democratic in the sense because it has been part of the political force in democracy. So we can divide, I think, the political Islamist group between those who accept democracy and those who do not accept democracy. And those who accept democracy are not necessarily, of course, not always peaceful. They can be violent sometimes, even though they accept democracy, because sometimes they are not so passionate. Yeah, so sometimes they are using, I mean, in democracy, you can find a political movement who uses violence as political strategy. Use violence as a way to pressure the government, because they believe that violence is the effective way. If they see that violence is the effective way, they will use violent vigilantism as a political strategy. And does not mean that they are anti-democracy. That does not mean that they want to turn Indonesia into Islamic State, but they just see that Indonesia should be governed in a more Islamic terms, with even though it's still democracy. Yeah. But there are groups of Islamists in Indonesia who really don't believe in democracy. They really consider democracy as infidel system, like Hizbut Tahrir, like Jemaah Islamiyah, like ISIS, for example, and some jihadi Salafism. They don't really see democracy as a way, so they work to delegitimize democracy. And there are some Islamist group who still believe in democracy in Indonesia, in NKRI. Yeah, they still believe in NKRI. If you say that NKRI harga mati, to some they also believe that NKRI also harga mati, but they define NKRI in different terms. That's why now you have Habib Rizik Syihab and Bakhtiar Nasir who talk about this concept of NKRI bersyariah. Yeah, NKRI bersyariah mean what is mean NKRI bersyariah is adopted in a larger scale in the regulations, in the constitutions, they require Muslim to implement Sharia. Yeah, so and they work in the democratic terms to promote that agenda without necessarily condemning democracy. So I think it's important to understand this, and especially among of us who are not very familiar with the varieties of Islamist organization. I think it is important to not judge based on their appearances, because sometimes those who has the similar appearance, the way they dress, the way they what appears, it's not always the same. Yeah, but that's the spectrum. I think it will be a long answer, Mas Aziz, to make it more detailed.
All right. Now it's now 5 minutes to 30. So if you still have one question, then this is your last opportunity from the people here in Zoom. No one? So perhaps last short question by Iqbal. How significant is the decline of Majelis Mujahidin being seen from the overall power of the Islamist communities in Indonesia? I mean, it's small, right? Small movement compared to FPI or even HTI. So what does the decline mean from the overall power of the Islamist communities?
Thank you. That's a very difficult questions, and yeah, it's important, but a very difficult questions. And I think it is important to note that the decline of Majelis Mujahidin does not represent the decline of Islamism in general. But what I want to show in here is that by showing the decline of one's organization, I want to give a sense that we should not be overestimate Islamisms in Indonesia. Islamism in Indonesia has never won the majority support politically. So, and I think on one side we have these groups like this figure like Habib Rizik Syihab, and the seat of the PKS in parliament is also getting more seats in the parliament. PKS won governor elections in West Sumatra, in Depok, for example, and the PKS, for example, has protected the dominance in Depok and West Sumatra for over a decade, I think, and that's one important achievement that they get. But they fail in many aspects. PKS also fail in many areas. So I think my point in showing this is not that I would suggest that there is no future for Islamists in Indonesia, but I think the future of Islamists in Indonesia will not be uniform. It will not be stable. Will not be and I think it will be depend on many factors. And I think the atmosphere that is created among some segment of society by raising that the religious landscape in Indonesia will be overturned to become like Afghanistan, to become like Syria, and I think we are still far from that. I think, hopefully, I mean, yeah, I think we have to work for that, but I think we do not have to take that for granted.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Iqbal. We should not take for granted about Islamism in Indonesia. We should work on to prevent the fate of Islamism in Indonesia to become the next of what, Afghanistan or Pakistan. We are still far from that. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Pak Iqbal, for your presentation and the participants for your questions and comments. This is the last Wednesday forum for the semester. Are there any things to say from the director of ICRS, especially Pak Zen, who is present here, or Mas Ancur from CRCS?
Will I receive something from the director?
What is it, Mas Aziz? You want this close?
Yeah, because this is the last Wednesday forum. Do you have something to say?
Well, I leave it to Bu Irma, the Associate Director of ICRS. Please, Bu Irma.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Mas Iqbal. Even though I didn't put my video on, I was listening to the presentation, very interesting. Thank you so much. And Mas Aziz, of course, for organizing today's event, but also every Wednesday. I think this forum, like it has been the tradition, first by CRCS and later on also by, first by CRCS and later on also joined by ICRS. We have a big commitment to continue this tradition for the next semester, and already in our meeting, virtual meeting last week, we have already listed some potential speakers for the next semester. So if you know somebody that you think will be valuable to be added to our list of speakers for the Wednesday Forum, or if you yourself is interested, you can contact us. Well, there is no guarantee that it will be accepted, right, Mas Aziz? But I mean, it's a great opportunity to be able, if you are able to send your work or work in progress in this forum. So thank you very much for being loyal participant. It's not easy also for us to organize this such of a meeting virtually, but in another way, it also provides us with opportunity to even invite more speakers from faraway places, and to also invite audiences from faraway places. So thank you once again, and hope to see you again next semester.
Okay, thank you, Bu Irma, Pak Iqbal, Pak Zen, Pak Mike, and all the people who are CRCS or ICRS for making all this possible. Yeah, let's hope that we can see each other again next semester around early February or in the midst of February with other hopefully interesting speakers as well. See you again. Good afternoon. I will end the live stream on YouTube, and if you want to stay, you can stay, and we can chat informally. If you want to leave, it's free for you to leave.